right, open up your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 7. We're just going to look at verses 1 through 10 this evening. And while you're turning there, I want to read this quote to you. Tell me if this sounds familiar, if you've ever heard this before. Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. Have you ever heard that line before? Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. Sound familiar? No? Well, I've seen it written down before. I've never really heard anyone use that, but it comes from a poem about this professor wrote this poem after watching all the college students. And this was in the early 1900s. And I'm not going to share the whole poem, but I want to read the first part and then the last part. He says in the very beginning of this poem, "Alas, regardless of their doom, the little victims play. No sense have they of ills to come, no care beyond today." What do you think he meant by that poem? Alas, regardless of their doom, the little victims play. No sense have they of ills to come, no care beyond today. A professor writing about the college students as he watched them in class and across the campus. What do you think he meant? Living for the day. You're right. I think that's the logical conclusion. At that stage of life, he's saying it's better to be ignorant and happy because there will be plenty of time later to experience the sorrows that knowledge may bring. He ends the poem like this: "Why should they know their fate, since sorrow never comes too late, and happiness too swiftly flies? Thought would destroy their paradise. No more where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise." And Solomon, if you remember all the way back to chapter 1, he came to a similar conclusion when he argued that same thing. For in much wisdom there is much, what, you remember? Grief. For in much wisdom there is much grief. And he that increases knowledge increases sorrow. Now, let's think about that, because Solomon talks about that in the very beginning of chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes. We have this professor from the 1900s also making the same point. And it is a thought that's really permeated a lot of people's minds to do what for their children, based on those two things that we read in the beginning in chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes and what that poem's talking about. What are we doing for kids? Okay, everything. We want them to be happy. We don't want them to have any hardship. We don't want them to worry about any of the problems that they will face later on in the future. What's the problem with that? Huh? It doesn't prepare them for the future. And this professor wasn't the only one who thought this way. Many people did this to their children, and now we see a lot of kids unprepared for the future. It's been slowly growing and growing, and I understand it. I get it. I have this feeling also where I want to shield my kids from everything, and by doing that, they don't learn anything. They don't learn anything. It's not that I want them to run from the trouble, but I want them to be aware. I need them to know. I want them to hear it from me before they hear it from other kids or a teacher in a way that I may not be able to overcome and correct their path to the right way. And so Solomon here is taking a second look at the problem and modifies his views here in chapter 7 and chapter 8. We're just going to look at the first 10 of chapter 7. But he discusses the importance of wisdom, which we will find 14 times in these two chapters. And he answers the question of chapter 12, verse 6, where he writes, "For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his futile life? He will spend them like a shadow. For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun?" So we're going to look at just these first 10, and I want to title this, "Wisdom Makes Life Better." Wisdom makes life better. And that's another key word we see through here, but look at verse 1. "A good name is better than a good ointment, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. That sounds like a real downer. But let's just look at the first part. A good name is better than a good ointment or good oil. The word is really for oil. What does he mean? What does that mean? Reputation. Okay, a good name is better than having good oil. So yeah, it's your reputation. What's the first thing he wants you to think about when he's writing this verse? And he immediately says, with that thought in your mind, your reputation, who you are, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. That's based off of that first part. So you got the birth and death. This is not comparing those two things, but it's making you think about something. When a child is born, is everyone happy? Yeah, they're all happy, and boy, we're excited. And do we know anything about this kid, what he's going to be? Nothing. What are we like when someone dies? We're sad, right? We're sad. What do we normally do? My mom's husband passed away this morning. It's not unexpected. We knew it was coming. So she called me about 5 o'clock this morning, and she was sad, and immediately we began to reminisce about all the things he has done in life. The good and the bad. We had some laughs about some of the other things, but mainly these good things he did. What is that? Between the birth and the death. I had a sermon about this years ago. It was called The Dash. Remember that? If you go to the cemetery, you see the year they were born, and the year they died, and in between that, you got the dash. That's the summation of your life. And that is what he's saying. The day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. A person with a good name, their death is better than their birth because it's going to be a remembrance. What kind of impact is upon people's lives? He wants us to think about that. What he wants people to do is to recognize the benefits of going to, for example, a funeral. We'll see that some more here in a moment. Verse 2. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, because that is the end of every man, and the living takes it to heart. So it is better to go to a house of mourning, a funeral. It's better to go there than to go to a party. Because what happens when you go to the funeral? What does it make you do? Think. Think about life. A lot of times we like laughter. We see that here in a moment in verse 3. Sorrow is better than laughter. We like laughter. There's nothing wrong with being happy and laughing. But I've been to some funerals. This was back in Texas where the whole service was making everyone laugh. And everyone was laughing. They were all laughing, and it was funny stories about everything that happened. But why do people enjoy that so much? It makes us forget about death, about what's coming. No one likes to think about dying and what's after this life. Have you ever asked that question? Maybe you come across someone and maybe somehow you start talking about the Bible and ask the question, have you ever considered what is going to happen after you die? And when that question comes up with any stranger or someone you barely know, that kills the conversation. That's the conversation killer, because nobody wants to talk about death. But shouldn't that be one of the most important things that we think about? Why am I here? Why was I born? I'm going to die. Then what? Should I be preparing for something and getting ready for something? And so Solomon's trying to say, you will learn far more going to a funeral and preparing yourself for what's to come than going to a party and feasting there in chapter 2. Because at the 2b, because that is the end of every man, and the living takes it to heart. When you go to a funeral, it makes you think. I don't know how many times whenever someone suddenly passes away where the family begins to really consider their lives, or how many times I've talked with family members up here after the death of a loved one, and they're talking about, I need to change my life. Why are they thinking about that? Death. Death makes them think about it, and they're considering their ways. Verse 3. Sorrow is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. Verse 4. The mind of the wise is in the house of mourning, while the mind of fools is in the house of pleasure. It is better, verse 5, to listen to the rebuke of a wise man. I'm sorry, that's verse 4 is where I wanted to go. I apologize. So as he's rounding this out, his whole point is mourning, right? To be sad. But it's not just a general statement, but overall, when it comes to being at the side of someone's deathbed or at a funeral and thinking about those things. Because when you're in that situation, it causes you to think about your own life and where you're headed. How many times have we seen people try or want to make a change in life because they attended a funeral service where it wasn't all happy laughter, but considering the death of a person and what comes after this life? Proverbs 10:7, the memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot. Have you ever been to a funeral of someone that you knew or maybe didn't know, and they're talking about all the things they've done in life, and you're just blown away. You're just impressed by all they've done. And then you start to think, man, what have I done? If I was to pass away today, what would they say? Anything? What have I done? Am I a nobody? Or have I prepared like this person did? This guy was ready. Am I ready? And you stop and you think about your life. We have a lot of folks in this world, we don't think much about life anymore. We don't think about our name and how important it is. Remember Mary when she anointed the feet of Jesus with that ointment? And the disciples, Judas mainly, grumbled about that. What did Jesus say about her? Maybe I should have made that one of the verses I had up there, huh? Her, don't bother her. Her name will be remembered forever because of what she has done here. And it's funny that Judas would be one of the ones who's grumbled because what do we remember about him? Traitor, betrayed the Lord. Do you know what Judas means in the Hebrew? Praiseworthy. Praiseworthy. But what do we think of him when we think of his name? Nothing good. Nothing good. Verses 2 through 4, Solomon advised the people to look death in the face and learn from it. We need to take life seriously. Psalm 90, verse 12, so teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. He's not presenting us with an either-or situation. He's asking us to have balance in our lives of happiness and sadness, mourning, to recognize what kind of life we are actually in. It's a vapor. It's not going to last long. What are we doing with this life? Now, verses 5 and 6, this is about rebuke. He says in verse 5, it is better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than for one to listen to the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorn bushes under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool, and this too is futility. So there in verse 5, better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than to listen to the song of fools. Okay. I mean, I think we all get what that means, right? What is the song of a fool? Well, nonsense. He's going to tell you whatever makes you happy. Whatever makes you happy. It doesn't matter if it's what you need to hear or not. A true friend will be honest with you. And a wise friend may rebuke you in order to what? Set your ways straight. It's not what we want to hear, is it? Oh, man, we can't handle it. And it's getting worse. I don't know if you know about my brother Corey. He works in corporate world. They have to set up, because he does the IT. He's supposed to be putting up these dummy computer terminals inside these safe rooms in different buildings. Do you know what a safe room is? And it's not to keep you safe from the canine dogs, in case that's what you're thinking over here. Not canine dogs. If you feel scared, someone's been mean to you, or your job's a little stressful, you go to your safe room. You go to a safe room. I didn't have a safe room when I was in Afghanistan. And I didn't have one in any of my jobs. Have any of you growing up have a safe room in your work? I didn't. What is that? Why do they have that? Why are people so sensitive and unable to deal with things? We shielded them. We didn't let them live life. We kept them so secure from any problems and didn't make them aware of any problems. They don't know how to deal with any problems. And so, verse 6, for the crackling of the thorn bushes under a pot, what does that mean? Have you ever tried to start a fire and you thought, you know what, I'm just going to get a bunch of hay and a bunch of twigs and I'll burn that. How quickly does that go out? Is it going to boil water? No, it's used. That's the thorn bushes. It's dry. It burns quick, but it's no good. It's useless. It doesn't create coal. It doesn't burn long. It doesn't burn hot. It's useless. So is the laughter of the fool. And this too is futility. That's what it does for you. It's worthless. It's no good. It does nothing for the dash in your life. If we allow it, a wise person's rebuke will accomplish far more in our lives than the flattery of a fool. And then verses 7, 8, and 9. For oppression makes a wise man mad, and a bribe corrupts the heart. The end of a matter is better than its beginning. Patience of spirit is better than haughtiness of spirit. Do not be eager in your heart to be angry. Beware of the easy road, of the easy way. And it often becomes expensive detours that are difficult and painful for us to deal with. Bribery appears here to be a quick way to get things done, but it only turns a wise man into a fool, and it encourages the corruption already in the heart. Far better that we wait patiently and humbly for God to work out his will than that we get angry and demand our own way. I think this is interesting because Jenny, I wasn't sharing with her what I was studying, but she was telling me, I think this was last night, she doesn't like that we use the word patience in the English language. It means, what is patience? How is that translated in the King James Bible? Long suffering. She kept saying, why don't we use that word? Because doesn't that make more sense? It really brings it across. Today, or not today, most of the days, Jenny and I have to be long suffering with our kids. Suffer long because we're trying to teach them. Patience, sometimes it's kind of, I need to be nice. Sometimes that comes to my mind. So I understand what she's saying. We need to be long suffering. Deal with the difficult things in order to help them become wise. Is it hard to rebuke your children, see them sad and unhappy like half the day? Yes, it is. But in the end, what will it do for them? They will grow in understanding, Lord willing. They'll be quiet. They'll be attentive. They'll be paying attention, and they will learn. I feel like we are doing it the right way with our kids. They seem to show it when they were doing Pew Packers, and Lord willing, we can keep going that way. He also says there in verse 8, the end of a matter is better than its beginning. Applies when we are living according to God's wisdom. The beginning of sin, for example, leads to a terrible end, death. But if God is at the beginning of what we do, he will see to it that we reach the end. Think about beginnings and ends of people in the Bible. What about the prodigal son? What was his beginning? Leaving home to do his own thing. How did that work out for him? His ending of that adventure? Bad. But when he turned and gave it over to the Lord, things got better. What were the beginnings of Joseph? Slavery. But ultimately, what? You guys?
Both of them were good.
Right, exactly. You go back.
Joseph, not through no fault of his own, the prodigal son.
He through his own faults. Joseph's, though, his was always God-centered. Things get bad, but it was a difficult time. But in the end, God's way brought him where he needed to be for himself and for his family. God always saves, you could say, the best for last. Even if our lives are terrible all through this dash, in the end, what do we get? Eternal life. Remember what was the first miracle Jesus performed? Water. And when they presented the water, what did the master of ceremonies, I guess, whatever his name was, Chief Steward, what did he say?
Hey, they kept the good stuff till last.
Why was that bad?
Because people are already drunk.
The best,
First, they get drunk and then you put the cheap stuff out.
the best came at the end. The best is yet to come. It's going to come at the end. The best that we're going to receive. Everything, sometimes we get a taste of things that are good, but when are we going to get the full measure? In heaven. God is at work. Things aren't always going to be great. It's not always going to be laughter and fun. It's going to be sad times and difficult times. But in the end, God is with us. So verse 10, do not say, why is it that the former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask about this. Have you ever said this? Oh, the good old days. I remember when. The good old days when it was just me and Jenny. I mean, wait a minute. Have you ever said that? The good old days? Huh? And my cow. Have you ever thought back to the good old days and all you remember are the good and you kind of glossed over the bad, or you forgot how bad certain things were? My favorite example of those are movies. Whenever I'm excited about a particular movie, I can't wait to share this with somebody or Jenny. We sit down to watch it. I haven't seen it since 1984. Terrible movie. Terrible. I'm like, why did I like it? In my mind, it was so great. Or all these things I saw as a child. As a child, it was new, it was wonderful, and I've never seen anything so like it. But now when I see it, I'm like, what did I see in this? Because we build it up in our minds at how great it was. Or what about when they rebuilt the temple after it was destroyed? They come back from captivity. They finished the temple. Who was rejoicing? The young people. Who was sad? The old people. What were they thinking about? The good old days. The good old days. The Roman poet had that phrase that we still use a lot today, seize the day, carpe diem. This does not mean we shouldn't learn from the past. It doesn't mean that we should not prepare for the future. Both of those are important. It means that we must live today in the will of God and not be paralyzed by yesterday or hypnotized by tomorrow. One person wrote this: while you are dreaming of the future or regretting the past, the present, which is all you have, slips away from you and it is gone. Does that make sense? It does. There's nothing wrong with reminiscing about the past, but don't let it squander the time you have. It's great to dream about the future, but don't let it squander the time you have, the dash. And what is more important? Go to a funeral. Remember how much time you've got. Not much time. Oh, I'll make things right with the Lord when I'm done with this or that or the other. So many people do that. And they squander the time they've got, and then it's too late. We're not going to get to these, but the next section, I like how Warren Wiersbe put it. He titled it, Wisdom Helps Us See Life Clearly. And then the last section, Wisdom Helps Us Face Life Stronger. And you can see that the preacher, Solomon, more likely, is building now, beginning to answer many of the questions that he had posed in the beginning. And he's showing, here's how you can really develop good wisdom. First, the only one we looked at tonight, remember death. Remember death and mourning. Laughter is easy, but mourning and remembering that life is short is hard, and it makes you think. I hope that was helpful. I hope that will be helpful in your reading and studying of Ecclesiastes, and perhaps even helpful in your studying with those that you love and those that you know that don't know God. Maybe they will come a little closer to the Lord with those understandings.